She had grown up in a small apartment where the walls were thin and the sounds of the street outside often blended with the soft notes from her old keyboard. That keyboard was not much to look at. Some keys stuck, the volume button worked only when it wanted to, and the power cord had to be positioned just right or it would die in the middle of a song. But to her, it was the most precious thing she owned. It was her doorway into a world that felt larger, kinder, and more beautiful than anything she had known in her daily life. Every day after school, she would sit in the corner of the room where the keyboard stood, letting her fingers create small melodies. Sometimes they were clumsy, sometimes they were emotional, but they always came from the heart. Her family didn't have much. Her mother worked long hours at a local shop, and her father had to take whatever jobs he could find. There was no money for private lessons or expensive instruments. Still, her passion for music only grew stronger. She taught herself to play by listening to songs on the radio and trying to match the notes by ear. She would make mistakes, start over, try again, and eventually play a piece so well that even she felt surprised. It took months, even years, to learn certain songs. But she always kept going. She often played at small neighborhood events. Community centers, charity gatherings, and local school programs would call her in when they needed someone to fill time between other activities. She didn't mind. It gave her a chance to share her music with people, and even if only a few truly listened, it made her happy. She never played for applause or praise. She played because it made her feel alive. But not everyone saw her the way she saw herself. Some people in the neighborhood believed she was wasting her time. They made comments about how she should focus on something practical or find real work instead of getting lost in notes and melodies. Others simply laughed at her instrument and said that anyone who wanted to be a pianist needed a grand piano and expensive training. Their words stung sometimes, but she tried not to let them sink too deep. She knew that people often judged what they did not understand. One day, she heard that a well-known music hall in the city nearby was hosting an evening event. Several performers were already scheduled, but they needed one more person to fill a short opening act. A friend from the community center, who had always believed in her, put her name forward without telling her. When she found out, she felt both terrified and excited. Playing in that hall was something she had only dreamed about. She had seen videos of performances there with bright lights, polished stages, and audiences that looked serious and hard to impress. When she received the message saying she had been selected as the warm-up performer, she almost couldn't breathe. She read it 3 times just to make sure she wasn't imagining it. She wanted to share the news with her family right away, but when she told them, she tried to keep her voice calm. Her mother hugged her tightly, and her father smiled wider than she had seen in a long time. It felt like a small moment of victory for all of them. In the days leading up to the event, she practiced even more than usual. Morning, afternoon, night, whenever she had a free moment, she returned to the keyboard. She picked a piece she knew well, something that connected to her deeply. It was a song she had learned slowly, one key at a time, over many nights of staying awake longer than she should have. She knew its rhythm by heart, and every note carried a memory. But with the excitement came a quiet fear. She knew she was not like the other performers who would be there. They had trained for years, taken lessons from respected teachers, and played on stages she had never even stepped foot on. She, on the other hand, had learned everything alone and had never played in front of a crowd bigger than a school auditorium. What if she made a mistake? What if the audience didn't like her playing? What if she froze the moment she walked onto the stage? These thoughts would visit her at night, making sleep difficult. The day of the event arrived sooner than she expected. She woke up early, checked her bag 3 times, and tried to calm her nerves by drinking warm tea. She wore simple clothes, nothing fancy, but they were clean and neat. Her mother squeezed her shoulders before she left and said, "Just play from your heart. That is enough." Those words stayed with her. When she reached the music hall, she felt small compared to the tall building with its grand entrance and shining glass doors. People in elegant outfits walked in and out with confidence. She stood outside for a moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The lobby was bright, with polished floors that reflected the lights above. She felt like she had entered another world, one far different from her daily life. As she checked in with the event staff, she heard the names of other performers, many of whom she had seen online. They were well-respected musicians, talented and experienced. She felt honored to be even in the same room as them. But slowly, she also noticed how some of them looked at her. Their eyes lingered on her simple clothes, her shy posture, and the fact that she carried no expensive equipment. Some of them whispered to each other, and she could tell the whispers were not kind. She tried not to let it bother her. She reminded herself why she came, to share her music, not to impress people with appearances. But the whispers grew louder as she walked past. A group of performers chuckled when they overheard that she was the warm-up act. One person even joked, "This should be interesting," in a tone that was clearly not supportive. She felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment but kept her head down. She was guided to the backstage area, where she would wait until it was her turn. The staff pointed out the piano she would be using on stage. It was huge, glossy, and perfect, nothing like her old keyboard at home. She walked toward it and lightly touched the keys with the tip of her finger when no one was watching. Felt like touching a dream. During the rehearsal session, she played softly at first, trying to get used to the feel of the piano. The sound that came from it was rich and full. She wanted to keep practicing, but she noticed that some people were watching her from the side of the room. They whispered again. She caught parts of what they said. Too soft, too simple, basic. Those words echoed in her mind, making her hands shake a little. Between rehearsals, she sat on a small bench backstage. She held her hands together to stop them from trembling. She reminded herself of all the nights she had stayed awake practicing, all the moments when she had promised herself never to give up. She thought about the small audiences that had encouraged her, the smiles she had seen from people who genuinely felt her music. The more she sat there, the heavier the pressure felt. She wondered if she was truly ready for something this big. She wondered if the people who doubted her were right. But then she closed her eyes and took a long breath. She reminded herself that even if she was not the most trained performer there, she had something real to share. Her story, her emotions, her heart. Her turn was approaching, and the murmur of the audience grew louder. She could hear people chatting, laughing, moving in their seats. She imagined walking out there and felt a wave of fear. But she also felt a spark of determination. She had worked hard to reach this moment, and she didn't want fear to take it away. She sat up straight, took another deep breath, and told herself quietly, "Just play. Let the music speak." She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this simple decision to stay true to herself, was about to change everything for her. As she waited backstage, she could hear the soft murmurs of the crowd growing louder. People were finding their seats, talking quietly, and some were already laughing at small jokes she couldn't hear clearly. The music hall felt enormous, with its high ceilings, sparkling chandeliers, and polished wood floors that reflected every movement on stage. She tried to focus on the piano in front of her, reminding herself that it was her chance to play, not to impress anyone with her appearance or background. But even with that thought, a small knot of fear lingered in her stomach. She watched as the other performers practiced nearby. They moved with confidence, exchanging nods and smiles with each other. Some of them glanced at her and whispered, their voices sharp and judgmental. One of them, a young man with a perfectly polished suit, leaned toward a friend and muttered something that made her heart sink. She couldn't hear every word, but it was clear they were mocking her. The words were like cold fingers on her skin. She kept her head down, pretending not to notice, but the feeling of being judged made her palms sweat. During the rehearsal, she played a few bars softly, trying to get used to the grand piano. The sound was different from her old keyboard, richer and heavier, and it made her nervous at first. Some of the performers snickered quietly when they thought she wasn't looking. One of them whispered, "She'll never handle the real stage." She felt the sting of their words, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She had learned to let her music speak louder than the criticism around her. The staff gave her a small schedule of when she would play, and she noticed that her slot was just before the main performers. It felt intimidating, like she was merely filling time before the real talent appeared. She tried to think positively. Even a short performance was an opportunity, a chance to share her music with a larger audience than she had ever seen. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself imagine the melody she wanted to play, feeling the familiar rhythm in her fingers. But the whispers continued. They seemed louder now that the audience was arriving. She could hear the faint echo of laughter and comments that made it obvious that some people expected her to fail. "Toy piano girl," she heard someone say, though she wasn't sure they realized she could hear. The words felt sharp, like small cuts to her confidence. She felt a wave of doubt creeping in. Maybe she had been mistaken to believe she could belong here. Maybe this was a place for people with perfect training and polished appearances, not someone who had learned everything by herself on a keyboard with missing keys. Her stomach tightened, but she forced herself to breathe deeply. She thought about the years she had spent practicing in her small apartment, the nights when she stayed up until her fingers ached, and the moments when music was the only thing that made her feel free. Those memories were her anchor. She remembered the feeling of discovering a new song, of mastering a piece note by note. She reminded herself that all the training and judgment in the world could not erase the hours of dedication she had given herself. She tried to focus on the keys in front of her. The grand piano looked intimidating at first, but as she placed her fingers on the smooth surface, a calm sense of familiarity began to spread through her. She had played hundreds of pieces before, though never in such a setting. The feel of the keys beneath her fingers brought back the countless hours of practice, and for a moment, she felt almost at home. She closed her eyes briefly and let the memory of her old keyboard guide her. As she prepared to play for rehearsal, she noticed a few other performers watching. Their expressions were unreadable at first, but she could sense skepticism in their eyes. They didn't know her story. They didn't know how she had taught herself every note, how she had played in tiny apartments and community centers, how she had learned to persevere despite the lack of support. They saw only a young woman with simple clothes and an unpolished background. She felt a rush of anger mixed with determination. If they wanted to judge her, she would show them through her music, not through words. The rehearsal began. She played softly at first, letting her fingers explore the piano. The notes sounded different from her own keyboard, deeper and heavier, but she adjusted quickly. Her music filled the room, and for a moment, the whispers seemed to fade. She could feel the resonance of each key, the vibration through her fingertips, and the sound carrying across the hall. It was a sensation she had never felt outside of her small apartment. For a brief moment, she forgot about the audience, the mocking musicians, and the expectations. It was just her and the music. But then the whispers returned. She caught phrases like, "Too slow," "Too weak," "She doesn't belong here." Each comment made her hesitate, and her hands shook slightly. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, repeating silently to herself that she was prepared, that she had worked hard, and that her music was real. She refused to let their opinions control her. Backstage, she sat on the small bench, hands folded in her lap. She watched the performers around her, noticing the confidence in their movements and the ease with which they handled the grand piano. She wondered if she could ever move with that kind of assurance. But then she remembered the child from her neighborhood who had once told her that her music made him happy. That memory brought a small smile to her face. If her music could touch even one person, it was enough. She would play for them, for herself, and for every small audience that had ever believed in her. Time passed slowly. The murmur of the crowd grew louder, the steps of the staff became more frequent, and she could hear the applause from the previous act as they finished. Each sound tightened the knot in her stomach, but she forced herself to focus on her breathing. One breath in, one breath out, one note at a time. That was all she needed to remember. A small voice inside her whispered doubts, telling her she might fail, that the audience would laugh, that she didn't belong. She pushed the voice aside and replaced it with memories of practice, of perseverance, and of small victories. She reminded herself that she had come this far despite the odds, and that in itself was a triumph. Finally, the stage manager approached and told her that her turn was almost ready. She rose slowly, smoothing her clothes and holding her bag tightly. Her heart pounded, and her hands felt clammy. She took one last deep breath and whispered to herself, "Play from your heart." As she walked toward the stage, she felt the eyes of some of the performers on her. Their looks were skeptical, some even amused. But she did not let it stop her. Each step was heavy with anticipation, but also with determination. She would not let their mockery define her performance. She reached the piano and sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, feeling the smooth surface and imagining the sound she wanted to create. The audience was beginning to settle, and the hum of conversation filled the hall. She closed her eyes, letting the memories of her practice sessions flood her mind. She thought about the nights spent alone, the small victories, and the encouragement of those who had believed in her. With a final deep breath, she pressed the first key. The note rang out, clear and soft. She played the opening melody, letting the music flow from her fingers. For a moment, the whispers seemed to disappear, replaced by the rhythm of her own heartbeat and the resonance of the piano. She knew that whatever happened next, she had made a choice to play with honesty, with emotion, and with courage. And that choice, she realized, was already a victory. She waited in the wings, her heart racing like a drum in her chest. The footsteps of people moving on stage echoed softly through the hall, and she could hear the quiet hum of the audience growing still. This was the moment she had both feared and longed for. Every lesson she had taught herself, every late night of practice, every small audience who had smiled and nodded, it had all led to this. Yet, standing there, she felt the weight of every judgment she had ever received pressing down on her. She thought of the whispers from the performers earlier, the mocking glances, and the subtle jokes. They had no idea who she really was or what she was capable of. But she could not let anger or resentment control her playing. Music was about expression, about sharing, and she needed to let the audience hear her story through the notes, not through words. She closed her eyes and imagined the small apartment where she had spent hours learning each piece, the keyboard with its missing keys, and the feeling of discovering a song on her own. Those memories became a source of courage. The stage manager signaled that it was her turn. She stood up, smoothing her simple clothes, and took a step forward. Each movement felt surreal. The lights of the stage shone brightly, making her momentarily squint, and the murmurs of the audience faded into the background. It was quiet now, a heavy silence that made her pulse quicken. She adjusted the bench, sat down, and let her hands hover above the keys for a moment. She felt the cool surface beneath her fingers and drew in a deep breath, closing her eyes as she did. She remembered the small child who had once said her music made him happy. That innocent praise, so pure and simple, gave her a moment of reassurance. It reminded her that the purpose of her music was not to impress skeptics or to gain validation from those who did not understand. It was to express what she felt, to tell her story without words. That thought steadied her hands. Her first note rang out softly, pure and tentative. She allowed it to resonate, feeling the vibration in her fingertips, letting it travel through her body and into the air. She began the melody she had practiced countless times, letting it flow naturally. At first, the audience remained quiet, some still unsure of what to expect. But slowly, the sound began to fill the hall, carrying a depth and warmth that surprised even her. She realized that the music was no longer just notes on a page. It was a reflection of her life, her struggles, and her perseverance. As she continued, she noticed subtle changes. The audience began to lean forward, their attention fully captured by the piano and the story it was telling. Some faces softened, some eyes widened in surprise, and a few people whispered to the person next to them, clearly impressed. She felt a rush of hope but kept her focus. She could not let distraction take over. She had to remain connected to every note, every pause, every subtle shift in rhythm. The mocking performers who had whispered earlier seemed to notice something different. Their smirks faded as they looked at her fingers dancing across the keys. One of them leaned forward, eyebrows raised, clearly taken aback. Another shifted uncomfortably in their seat. She felt no satisfaction in seeing their surprise. Her focus remained on the music. But inside, A small part of her felt vindicated. The notes she had struggled to learn alone were now commanding the attention of those who had doubted her. The melody began to swell, growing in intensity and emotion. She let herself feel every memory, every hardship, every moment of triumph and failure she had experienced. Each note became an expression of her journey, a story that words could never fully capture. She had learned to play this piece in quiet solitude, and now it was alive, speaking for her in a way she had never imagined. The sound filled the entire hall, reverberating off the walls and ceiling, creating a presence that was impossible to ignore. She noticed that some audience members were leaning back in their seats, as if they could not believe the transformation from the nervous young woman who had arrived backstage to the confident, expressive performer before them. She could feel the energy shift in the room. The tension of judgment and doubt was being replaced by admiration and wonder. She stayed connected to each note, aware of the silence that followed every pause, savoring the way the music seemed to hold everyone's attention without forcing it. A few times her fingers slipped slightly, but she didn't falter. She had learned long ago that mistakes were part of learning, part of expressing herself. She adjusted, continued, and let the piece carry on. The small errors did not diminish the beauty of the performance. Instead, they made it human, real, and relatable. The audience responded to that authenticity, unconsciously leaning in closer, listening more intently, feeling the emotions she poured into each chord. She began the final section of the piece, the part she had always loved the most. It required both precision and emotion, a combination she had struggled to master over months of practice. She allowed herself to feel the music deeply, to let it flow naturally from her hands to the piano, to the room, and to the hearts of those listening. Every note seemed to carry the weight of her journey, the sacrifices she had made, and the belief she had held onto despite everything. The room was completely silent now, save for the sound of the piano. She could feel the collective focus of the audience on her playing, a wave of energy that both humbled and strengthened her. She was no longer nervous in the same way. She was focused, fully present, and connected to every vibration of the keys beneath her fingers. She realized that she had found a place where her music could speak louder than any doubt, louder than any criticism, louder than fear. As she reached the final chord, she held it for a moment longer than usual, letting it resonate through the hall. The silence that followed was heavy and complete, almost sacred. It was a pause that seemed to stretch infinitely, giving the audience a chance to fully absorb what they had just heard. She slowly lifted her hands from the keys, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had poured everything into those minutes, and it showed. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. Then, one by one, the audience began to react. There was a soft clap, then another, until it grew into a thunderous applause that filled the entire hall. People were standing, some wiping tears from their eyes, some leaning forward to applaud louder, and others simply staring, stunned by the depth of her performance. She could feel the vibrations of the clapping through her chest, a powerful reminder that her music had reached them. Backstage, some of the performers who had doubted her earlier approached cautiously. Their expressions were mixed with surprise, admiration, and, in some cases, embarrassment. They offered quiet compliments, acknowledging her skill, and a few asked questions about her technique. She accepted their words graciously, not with pride, but with quiet satisfaction that her music had done what words could not. She walked off the stage, feeling a lightness she had never known before. Her hands tingled from the effort, and her heart was still racing, but she felt alive in a way that only music could make her feel. She had faced fear, judgment, and doubt, and she had emerged with her passion intact, stronger and more confident than before. The journey had not been easy, but in that moment, it had all been worth it. The small audience members she had played for over the years would have recognized the same passion she had always had. The notes carried her story, her struggles, and her victories. She realized that true talent and dedication could shine, even in the face of mockery and disbelief. It was not about being perfect or meeting the expectations of others. It was about staying true to herself and letting the music speak. And now everyone in that hall had heard her story. The moment she started playing, the hall seemed to change. The gentle opening notes, soft and precise, captured the attention of everyone in the room. People who had been chatting or distracted turned their heads, curious and drawn in by the unexpected depth of sound. She could feel their eyes on her, some skeptical, some intrigued, but none of that mattered. Her focus was entirely on the piano, on the music, and on letting each note convey her story. Her hands moved gracefully over the keys, her fingers carrying both precision and emotion. Each note was deliberate yet free, a reflection of years of practice and self-discovery. The melody she played was a mix of softness and intensity, rising and falling like waves. She let the music tell her story, the long nights of practice, the moments of doubt, and the perseverance that had brought her here. She had never felt more alive. The sound seemed to flow effortlessly, filling every corner of the hall, leaving no space untouched. The audience, initially unsure, was now completely captivated. They leaned forward in their seats, eyes fixed on her hands and the piano. The mocking whispers she had overheard earlier were gone. In their place was awe and silent admiration. People exchanged glances, their expressions showing surprise that someone they had underestimated could evoke such emotion and skill. She continued to play, aware of the growing tension in the room, yet she remained calm, letting the music carry her forward. Her confidence grew with each passing note. The melody became richer and more complex, weaving through the air with a power that made the audience sit up straighter, their attention fully captured. Even the performers who had mocked her before seemed stunned. They watched silently, realizing that her skill and passion were far beyond what they had expected. It was not just a performance. It was an expression of her heart, a story told without words. She reached a section of the piece that required both technical skill and deep emotion. Her fingers flew over the keys, executing intricate patterns she had mastered through countless hours of practice. Yet, it was not mechanical. Every note carried feeling, every pause was intentional. She felt the music moving through her, as if it had a life of its own, guiding her hands and her heart. The hall seemed to respond, the notes resonating against the walls, echoing in a way that made her feel connected to everyone listening. The atmosphere in the room shifted completely. People who had doubted her were now silent, completely absorbed by the beauty of her playing. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned back, a hand on their chest, moved by the depth of emotion she conveyed. Even those who had expected a simple, unremarkable performance were forced to reconsider their judgments. The young woman who had been mocked, laughed at, and underestimated was now commanding the attention and respect of everyone present. She noticed a few familiar faces from her neighborhood in the crowd. Their smiles encouraged her, reminding her that this moment was not just for her, but for all those who had believed in her when no one else did. She played for them, for her family, and for herself, letting every note reflect the struggles and triumphs that had shaped her journey. The music became a bridge, connecting her experiences to the hearts of the listeners, creating a shared understanding that needed no words. As she approached the final section of the piece, the music swelled, growing in intensity and emotion. The notes became more powerful, yet they retained the delicate sensitivity that had captured the audience from the beginning. She felt a sense of liberation, as if all her fears, doubts, and insecurities were being released through the music. The hall was completely silent, the audience hanging on every note, fully immersed in the performance. It was a moment of pure connection, a shared experience between the musician and the listeners. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, navigating complex passages with ease. She could feel the energy in the room, the collective heartbeat of the audience matching the rhythm of her music. The notes carried a story of resilience, passion, and determination. Every person in the hall could sense that this was more than just a performance. It was a declaration of her talent and her journey. The once skeptical and mocking onlookers were now captivated, unable to look away. She reached the climax of the piece, a powerful crescendo that filled the hall with sound and emotion. Her hands moved rapidly yet flawlessly, the melody soaring to its peak. The audience was on the edge of their seats, completely absorbed, some holding their breath, others with tears glistening in their eyes. She felt a surge of triumph, a validation of all the hard work, sacrifice, and determination that had brought her here. The music was a testament to her journey, a story that transcended words and left everyone in the hall profoundly moved. As the final notes faded into silence, the room remained still for a moment, as if the audience was collectively catching its breath. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started softly, a few hands clapping, but quickly grew into a powerful, roaring ovation. People stood, cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes, others clapping with full enthusiasm. The energy in the hall was electric, a mix of admiration, astonishment, and joy. She remained seated for a moment, letting the sound of the applause wash over her, feeling the warmth and acceptance that had once seemed so distant. The performers who had mocked her earlier approached cautiously, their expressions a mixture of surprise and respect. They offered compliments, some apologizing for their earlier behavior. A few asked questions about her technique, clearly intrigued by the depth of her skill. She accepted their words graciously, not with arrogance, but with quiet satisfaction. Her music had spoken for her, and it had been understood and appreciated by those who had doubted her the most. Backstage, she was greeted by the event organizer, who congratulated her and expressed amazement at her performance. He mentioned opportunities for future events, even suggesting a chance to perform on larger stages. She felt a mix of pride and humility, realizing that her dedication and perseverance had opened doors she had only dreamed of. It was a moment of validation, but more importantly, it was a moment of recognition for her passion and talent. Walking off the stage, she felt a sense of relief and exhilaration. The fear and tension that had gripped her earlier were replaced by a deep sense of accomplishment. She had faced the judgment, the doubt, and the mockery, and she had triumphed through her music. Her heart was still racing, her hands still tingling from the effort, but she felt more alive than ever before. This performance had not only showcased her talent but had also strengthened her confidence and belief in herself. She thought about the small audiences she had played for over the years, the community events, and the people who had supported her when no one else did. Each note she played tonight was a reflection of that journey, a culmination of all the struggles and joys that had shaped her as a musician. She realized that true success was not measured by applause alone, but by the ability to stay true to oneself and to share one's passion with honesty and heart. The memory of her old keyboard, with its stuck keys and worn edges, came to her mind. It had been the foundation of her journey, the instrument that had allowed her to explore music in her own way. She smiled at the thought, recognizing that every step, no matter how small or humble, had led to this moment of triumph. The grand piano on stage had been the medium, but her heart and determination had been the true source of the music that left the audience speechless. As she left the hall, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. She had not only performed for an audience but had shared a piece of her soul. The experience had taught her that courage, perseverance, and authenticity were more powerful than fear or doubt. The applause, the admiration, and the newfound respect were rewards, but the true victory was the knowledge that she had stayed true to herself and her music. And in that, she knew she had achieved something far greater than recognition. She had inspired herself and others with the power of her story. The hall continued to echo with applause as she walked backstage, still trying to catch her breath. The warmth of the audience's reaction washed over her like sunlight breaking through clouds. She could feel the difference this performance had made, not only to those who had watched but to herself as well. Every fear, every worry, every moment of doubt had been met with the truth of her own ability. She had faced a room full of skepticism and emerged with her music as the voice of her triumph. People from the audience started approaching her, offering congratulations. Some were moved to tears, others smiled broadly, and a few simply shook their heads in disbelief, overwhelmed by the depth and sincerity of her playing. They spoke of how they had never expected such a young performer to evoke so much emotion, and how each note seemed to tell a story of struggle, hope, and determination. She listened quietly, humbled by the words, letting them sink in without letting pride take over. It was the first time she truly understood how music could bridge gaps between people, how it could communicate emotions more clearly than words ever could. Among the audience were a few performers who had previously mocked her. They approached hesitantly, unsure of how to react. She could see the mix of surprise and admiration in their eyes. They offered her compliments, some apologizing for their earlier behavior, while others simply nodded in acknowledgement of her talent. She accepted their words graciously, understanding that recognition, even belated, was a gift of its own. Her performance had spoken for itself, and that was more important than any words exchanged afterwards. The event organizer came over, smiling widely. He expressed his amazement at her performance and said that he wanted to see her perform again at future events. She felt a flutter of excitement and disbelief. Opportunities she had only dreamed of were now within reach. She thanked him sincerely, realizing that the doors she had once thought closed to her were now open. This moment marked the beginning of something new, a journey that had the potential to take her far beyond the small apartment where it had all begun. Walking away from the stage, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The fear that had gripped her before the performance had been replaced with a quiet confidence. She had proven to herself that she could rise above judgment and doubt, that perseverance and passion could overcome obstacles that once seemed insurmountable. The experience had strengthened her, not just as a musician but as a person who had learned to trust in her own abilities and stay true to her heart. As she gathered her belongings, she thought back to the countless nights spent practicing on her old keyboard. Each lesson, each mistake, each tiny victory had contributed to the person she had become. She remembered the moments of frustration when she wanted to give up, the times she had questioned whether her efforts were worth it, and the nights when she had played alone just to hear the music herself. Every one of those moments had built her resilience, shaping the skill and depth that had now captivated an entire audience. She glanced around the backstage area, noticing the performers packing up and talking quietly among themselves. Some of them approached her to ask about her journey, curious about how she had learned so much without formal training. She spoke openly about her experiences, about the hours of practice and self-discipline, and about the support she had received from her community. Her story resonated with them, a reminder that talent could flourish in unexpected places, and that determination often mattered more than formal credentials. Later, as she left the hall and stepped out into the cool evening air, she felt the weight of the day lift from her shoulders. The city lights stretched out before her, twinkling like stars, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a deep sense of belonging. She had taken a risk, faced fear and doubt, and emerged with her dreams intact. The applause, the admiration, and the recognition were affirmations of her talent, but more importantly, they were affirmations of her courage. She thought about her family, who had supported her quietly from the beginning. Their belief in her had been a steady presence, a foundation that allowed her to keep going even when the world seemed indifferent or critical. She knew that they would be proud of what she had accomplished tonight, and the thought brought a warm smile to her face. She had not only achieved personal growth, but had also honored the faith of those who had always believed in her potential. The days that followed brought new opportunities. She received invitations to perform at other events, offers from music teachers impressed by her natural talent, and even interest from organizations that sought to showcase emerging musicians. She approached these opportunities with the same dedication and focus that had brought her this far, knowing that every performance was a chance to grow, to connect, and to inspire. Her journey was no longer just about personal expression. It had become a path to touch the lives of others through her music. With each new performance, she grew more confident. The nerves never disappeared entirely, but they became a familiar companion, a reminder that she was stepping into spaces that challenged her and demanded her best. She learned to embrace the anxiety, using it to sharpen her focus and enhance the emotion she brought to each piece. Her music evolved, reflecting not only her skill but also her experiences, her observations, and her growing understanding of the world. In time, she became known not just for her technical ability, but for the emotion and authenticity that defined her performances. Audiences came to expect more than flawless execution. They came to witness the story, the journey, and the heart behind each note. She had discovered that the power of music lay not only in mastery but in honesty, in the courage to reveal oneself through sound and rhythm. She often thought back to the first time she had been mocked, to the whispers and laughter of those who underestimated her. Rather than letting those moments define her, she had allowed them to fuel her determination, to remind her of what she could accomplish when she trusted in her own abilities. That experience became a turning point, a lesson in resilience and perseverance that shaped her approach to music and to life. She realized that every obstacle could be transformed into an opportunity, every doubt into motivation. Her story inspired others, particularly young musicians who faced similar challenges. She spoke at community events, shared her experiences, and encouraged aspiring artists to pursue their passion regardless of the obstacles. She emphasized the importance of dedication, practice, and self-belief, reminding them that talent could be found in unexpected places and that success was often a result of persistence and heart. As she continued her journey, she remained humble, always remembering the small apartment, the worn keyboard, and the people who had believed in her from the beginning. She celebrated each success but never forgot the lessons of struggle, the value of hard work, and the importance of staying true to oneself. Her music became a reflection of her life, a testament to the power of courage, perseverance, and authenticity. Years later, when people spoke of her, they did not just speak of a skilled pianist. They spoke of someone who had overcome doubt, mockery, and hardship to share her gift with the world. They spoke of a young woman who had refused to be defined by others' opinions and who had allowed her passion to shine through, touching hearts and inspiring countless lives. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the journey was far from over. Each performance, each note, each connection with an audience was another chapter in a story that began with a simple love for music and a determination to never give up. In the quiet moments after her performances, she would sit alone at her piano, reflecting on her journey. The applause and recognition were gratifying, but what mattered most was the music itself, the notes, the melodies, and the emotions they carried. She had learned that true fulfillment came from expressing herself fully, from sharing her heart without fear, and from believing in her own worth. And as she played, she felt a sense of peace and purpose, knowing that her music could continue to inspire, heal, and move those who listened. Her journey was a testament to the idea that talent combined with perseverance, courage, and authenticity could overcome even the harshest judgment. She had been mocked, doubted, and underestimated, but she had transformed those challenges into motivation. Her story, shared through the universal language of music, reminded everyone that no matter how humble the beginnings, passion and determination could lead to extraordinary achievements. And with each new audience, she continued to write the next chapter of her life, one note at a time, leaving a legacy of hope, inspiration, and the undeniable power of following one's heart.